Hi. Hi. I wanted to address the comment that Steve Long made about markets rewarding greed and fear. And my issue with that is that maybe it does, but what system doesn't? And I think that an earlier question about the Bible and what that tells us about the human condition is that people are greedy. People envy one another, and people do bad things to one another. And so when you think about capitalism versus socialism or communism, all I see with communism has been misery, enslavement of their own people, murdering mass amounts of people, like 100 million people in the last century. And so I would argue that we have to look at the alternatives of, of capitalism. And I would argue that capitalism gives dignity to people, it allows people to do and flourish, and not to enslave people. So that's what I'd like to say.
Anybody want to speak
Yeah, I would
quickly to
just
that?
quickly, I do appreciate, I'm more comfortable in data myself and history, and I do think when we talk about what an ideal system looks like, we do have to look back to what the alternatives are and what history shows. And I do think it's very hard to argue that in practice, there's been a socialist country that's had more life satisfaction, more material success. You can go along a number of dimensions. That's been better. But I would also caution, just since this is not only the C. O'Neill Center, but also a conference on faith, is that no system does offer the dignity itself, that no system, even capitalism, has to be accompanied, I think, by a strong moral fabric, by humans, by that if we're looking to that to be the savior, it's not going to be, but it does set up the conditions that make it most likely for people to be given dignity and worth. And I think that's important to say. So
I should say too, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Nobody's defending Stalinism, so be careful in any kind of dogmatic argument where our options, if the options are Stalinism or capitalism, of course you're going to go with capitalism. But there's some very careful thinkers in democratic socialism today. I don't know if what they say is right about what we can do with sovereign wealth funds, but I'm intrigued by it. And if a priori I can't do it because somebody's going to sort of raise Stalinism, I can't even think about it, that seems to me to be a dogmatic argument and not a rational argument. So I'm not saying that they may be wrong. I mean, they may be wrong that the future is going to be, we sort of slowly tax this wealth to create a corporate, a sovereign wealth fund. I mean, I hope if it's going to turn into Venezuela, then of course not. But if it's going to look a little more like Norway, hey, I'm not all opposed to that. So I just think we have to be very careful, especially in a university, to not make those kinds of binaries.
Yeah, I think I would definitely have to agree with that. That's actually one of the great pitfalls in opinion writing, actually. These sort of, not quite a red herring, but these associations that don't necessarily have to be true. I would agree no one is saying that, we should go back to communist China. That's just not going to happen. That's not the opposite of capitalism. But capitalism can be different by degree. We can have capitalism that valorizes certain behaviors, that rewards greed extensively, that rewards preying on other people's fears extensively, or some that has, a tempering mindset where we actually think about what we really should reward, and perhaps, yes, induce regulation that, may not make us as profitable as we could be, perhaps, but that leaves us a little bit more of our humanity. And I think that's possible. I think we can do that, and it doesn't then become the equivalent of turning to full communism or full socialism. I think that's extremely possible, and that's actually what we're supposed to be working towards on this panel and in our lives.